The first thing she remembered was the taste of copper, and the second was that she had no name. The pod opened the way a wet mouth opens. There was a soft pneumatic sigh, a parting of something membranous and warm, and then a tide of fluid the color of weak tea spilled across a floor she could not yet see. She came out of it on her hands and knees naked, hair plastered to her shoulders, lungs burning the way lungs burn when you have been breathing through something other than air. She coughed. She vomited. She coughed again. And then, because some part of her was still a soldier even when the rest of her was nothing, she crawled. The chamber she crawled into was the size of a cathedral and built like the inside of a beehive. Cells of resin lined the walls, each one taller than a man, each one filled with a shape suspended in slow-moving amber. In some of the cells, the shapes had wings. In some, they had too many limbs. In one very close, a thing the size of a horse pressed its long blue palm flat against the resin as if it had been trying for a very long time to push through. Its eyes were open. It was not breathing. She did not scream. Screaming was for people who still believed someone was listening. She made it to a wall and put her back against it, and waited for her heart to remember its rhythm. The floor under her was warm. Everything was warm, the way a body is warm. She understood in a slow and terrible way that she was inside something alive, or something that had been alive recently enough that the difference did not matter. Her name. Her name. She reached for it the way you reach for a light switch in a dark room you have walked through 1,000 times, and found nothing under her fingers. She knew she had been a person. She knew she had been somewhere. She knew there had been a kitchen, once with yellow curtains, and a woman who sang in a language that was not English while she rolled out dough, and the woman's hands had smelled like flour and lemon rind. She knew she had loved that woman. She did not know who that woman was. She was breathing fast now. She made herself stop. She made herself count. 2, 3. On 4, the wall behind her hummed and a panel the size of a door dilated open like a pupil, and the curator came through. It was tall. It was the first thing she noticed, and the last thing she would ever forget, the wrongness of its height. It had to fold itself a little to come through the opening, even though the opening was twice the size of any human door. Its body was the color of old ivory, and its limbs were thin and many, 4 arms, 2 of them ending in surgical clusters she could not look at directly. Where a face should have been there was only a smooth plate of bone, faintly luminous, with no eyes and no mouth, and no opening of any kind. It made a sound like wind through reeds. The sound resolved itself, somewhere behind her teeth, into language. Specimen 91 is awake, it said. This is unusual. I will note it. She did not answer. She was looking at its hands. You should not be standing, it said. The decanting is incomplete. Lie down. I will resume the process. No, she said. The word came out of her like something she had been holding in her mouth for a long time. It surprised her. It seemed to surprise the curator too. The bone plate tilted. No is not a response the specimen is permitted to make, it said, mildly. Lie down. She did not lie down. She slid sideways along the wall, away from it, and the curator made a small disappointed sound and lifted one of its surgical arms, and a thread of light came out of the cluster and touched her thigh, and her leg went out from under her like a cut rope. She fell. She did not feel pain. She felt nothing at all, from the hip down, and that absence was worse than any pain she had ever known. There, curator said. Now lie down properly. I dislike repeating instructions. You are the last of your kind on this preserve, and I have devoted considerable resources to your acquisition. I would prefer not to damage you further. The last of your kind. The words went into her the way a knife goes into water, soundless, and then began to spread. She lay on her back and stared up at the cathedral ceiling and listened to the curator move around her, humming its reed music, adjusting things she could not see. She made her good leg twitch. It twitched. She made her hand close into a fist. It closed. She made herself think, slowly and clearly, through the fog of whatever they had grown her in. I am a person. I am a person. I have a name and I will remember it. I have a home and I will find it. I am not a specimen. The curator leaned over her. The bone plate of its face caught the light. She could see her own reflection in it. Distorted. Small. You are a fine example, it said, almost tenderly. The Catalogued will be honored to receive you. She smiled at it. It was the first thing she had done since waking that she chose to do. She showed the curator her teeth, all of them, and she said, very quietly, "My mother sang in Polish." The curator paused. "That is not relevant," it said. "It is to me," she said, and then the fog took her again. She went down into the dark, with that one true thing held in her fist like a coin. When she woke the second time, she was in a smaller cell, and there was a man kneeling beside her holding a piece of cloth to her forehead. He was not human exactly. She understood that before he spoke. He was the right shape, 2 arms, 2 legs, a face arranged in the correct order, but there was something wrong about his skin in the way it caught the light. Something faintly iridescent, like oil on water, and his eyes were too large and too dark, with no whites at all. He was thin. He was wearing the remains of what had once been a coverall, and stained, with a faded patch on the shoulder she could not read. "Don't sit up," he said. His voice was rough and quiet and weirdly familiar, the cadence of someone who had not spoken aloud in a long time and was relearning the shape of words. "Your leg's coming back. It'll itch like fire for an hour and then you'll be able to walk. Don't sit up yet." "Who are you?" she said. "Nobody important," he said. "This." He held a cup of something to her lips. It tasted of metal and salt. She drank it. "Where am I?" "Preserve world. Outer arm of the spiral. The catalog calls it Vault 12. I don't know what your people called it before they came here." "My people. Humans," he said. He said it carefully, the way you say a word in a foreign language you have been practicing. "You're a human. Do you remember that?" She closed her eyes. She did remember it, actually. The word landed in her and made a small bright sound, like a struck bell. And other words came after it: earth, sun, coffee, brother, rain, the yellow curtains, pierogi. Her mother had made pierogi on Sundays, and she had stood on a stool to watch, and her mother had pressed the edges with the tines of a fork, and her mother had been called Helena, she said out loud and started to cry. "That's good," the man said gently. "That's very good. Names come back first. Hold on to it." "Helena," she said again. "Helena Marchak. I'm Helena Marchak. I was a ranger. I was on a survey ship. The Branwyn. We were mapping the Korolev drift. There was a flash," the man said. "And then nothing. And then you woke up in a pod." "Yes, they all say that. They. The others, before you." She opened her eyes and looked at him properly for the first time. He was older than he had first seemed. There were lines at the corners of his 2 dark eyes, and silver in the stubble on his jaw, and his hands, holding the cloth, were the hands of someone who had worked. The patch on his shoulder, now that she looked, the faded outline of a wheel of stars. She had seen that patch before on uniforms on news feeds. On a memorial wall in the academy at Vela Outpost, she breathed. "That's the Vela Outpost patch. The Vela Outpost was lost 90 years ago." The man smiled at her. It was a small, sad, tired smile. 94, he said. "But who's counting?" His name was Tomas. He had been 26 years old when the curator's harvesting drone had taken him out of the cockpit of a search and rescue cutter above a dying colony, and he had been 26 years old, more or less, ever since. The curator's preserve did things to time. It did things to bodies. He showed her his hand, and the skin had shifted under the light like the skin of a fish. He showed her his teeth, which were too many and too even. He showed her the scar on his wrist, where in his second decade of captivity, he had tried to open a vein with a sharpened spoon and had failed because the curator had already replaced his blood with something that did not know. Clot. "They don't kill us," he said. "That's the thing you have to understand first. They don't want us dead. Dead specimens are worthless. Us. They keep us, and they fix us. And they fix us. And after a while you forget what fixing was supposed to feel like." "How many of us are there?" she said. "Here, now, you and me. I thought you said. I said there were others before you. I didn't say they were still here." He looked at his hands. "The catalog moves on. When a specimen is fully documented, it is transferred to the central archive. 3 light years from here, nobody comes back from the archive. I don't know what's in the archive. I have ideas. How long have you been alone?" He had to think about it. 11 years, he said finally. "Give or take. The last one was a Kthari. Big, gentle 6 eyes. We learned to play chess with stones. She lost on purpose because she thought it would make me happy. They came for her on a Tuesday. I think it was a Tuesday. I keep a calendar. He gestured at the wall behind her, and she turned her head and saw the scratches, thousands of them in neat columns, marching from the floor to far above her head where he could no longer reach without standing on something. "I keep a calendar," he said again, softly. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because in about 6 hours, the curator is going to come back and start the documentation process," he said. "And you are going to want to know, when it begins, that you are not the first and you are not alone, and there is a man in the next cell. Knows your name. Helena Marchak, ranger of the Branwen, daughter of a woman who sang in Polish. I will say it back to you every time you forget. That is what I can do." She looked at him for a long time. "Thomas," she said. "Yes. What was your mother's name?" He blinked. She saw something move behind his two dark eyes. Something he had not let move for a long time. "Inez," he said. "She made empanadas on Sundays." "Hello, Tomas, son of Inez," she said. "I am Helena, daughter of." She stopped. She reached. She could not find it. "Not yet, daughter of the woman in the yellow kitchen," she said. "It will come back. It will come back," he agreed. He left her then, slipping through a seam in the wall she had not noticed, and she lay on the warm floor and looked at the calendars of scratches and thought about a man who had counted 11 years of Tuesdays in a cell. She did not sleep. She did think she could sleep, ever again, she thought instead. The documentation began the next morning, if morning was a word that meant anything here. The curator came for her with 2 others. They were smaller than it, and they had no faces either, and they moved on too many legs in a way that made her stomach turn. They lifted her gently and carried her down a long corridor that pulsed with soft pink light, and they laid her on a table that was not a table, but a sort of living plinth that adjusted itself to the shape of her body. Restraints came out of the plinth-like roots and held her wrists and her ankles and her throat. She did not fight them. Tomas had told her not to fight them the first time. "Save it," he had said. "Save all of it." The curator stood over her. "I will now record your phenotype," it said pleasantly. "This will not be painful. You will experience some disorientation. Please do not be alarmed." It put one of its surgical arms against the side of her head, and the cluster opened, and something thin and bright went into her ear. Scamish. And she was suddenly not in the room. She was in the kitchen. The yellow curtains were moving in the breeze. Her mother was at the counter, with her back to her, sleeves rolled up, humming. There was flour on the floor. There was a radio playing somewhere. News in a language Helena had not heard in years, a man's voice talking about a strike at the shipyards. Helena was 9 years old. She was on the stool. Her mother turned around and smiled at her and held up a pierogi, perfect and pale, and said, "Mama," Helena said in the cell, in the now, with her throat in a restraint and a thread of light in her ear. "Interesting," the curator said. "Olfactory and gustatory recall. The species indexes memory through food preparation. I will note this." It withdrew the thread. Helena was back. She was shaking. Her face was wet. "You went into my head," she whispered. "I observed your phenotype," the curator said. "It is the standard procedure. You will not retain trauma from the observation. The next phase will require you to vocalize." "What does that mean?" "You will speak," curator said, "and I will record. I require samples of your language. Begin with simple statements, your designation, your origin, the names of your kin." She stared up at the bone plate where its face should have been. "No," she said, "is not a response the specimen is permitted to make." "No," she said again. The thread came out of the cluster. It was not exactly painful. It was worse than painful. It was a feeling like every nerve in her body had been gently, methodically, taken out and put down on a tray and shown to her one by one. She heard herself screaming from a long way off. She heard herself begging from somewhere closer. She did not, she realized through the white roar of it, give the curator her designation. She did not give it her origin. She did not give it the name of her mother. She said, instead, in a voice she did not recognize, the only thing she could think of to say, she said the Lord's Prayer. She had not said it since she was 12 years old. She did not believe in it. She did not know why it came out of her. It came out of her in Polish, the way her mother had taught it to her, and she said it through her teeth, and she said it through the bright thing in her ear, and she said it through the restraints, and she said it until the curator made an annoyed reed sound and withdrew the thread. "That is not a designation," it said. "No," she agreed. Face was wet. Her throat was raw. It isn't. You are being uncooperative, yes. The catalog does not require your cooperation. I am informing you as a courtesy. The documentation will proceed regardless. I know, she said. I just wanted you to hear me say it first. The bone plate tilted again. The same way it had tilted the first time when she had said, no. Pert. She had this distinct impression for one strange moment that the curator did not entirely know what to do with her. Put the thread back in her ear. She said the prayer again. She said it for 3 hours. She lost the meaning of the words somewhere in the second hour. They became sounds. They became the shape of sounds. They became the shape of her mother's mouth moving over the kitchen table on a Sunday evening with the radio on low. She kept saying them. The curator kept the thread in her ear. The pain was a tide and the prayer was a stone, and the tide came in, and the tide went out, and the stone stayed. At one point, somewhere near the end, she became aware that she was no longer making any noise at all. Her throat was closed. Her lips were moving but no sound was coming out. The curator was still listening. The curator, she realized, through the white roar, did not actually need her to make a sound. The thread in her ear was reading something deeper than sound. It was reading the shape of the prayer in her, the way the words sat in her bones. And still, she did not give it her name. She gave it her grandmother's prayer. She gave it the rhythm of an old woman, bent over a wooden table in a country that no longer existed in the way it had when she was a child. She did not give it Helena Marchak. When the curator finally pulled the thread out, the silence in the room was so complete that she could hear the faint hum of the plinth beneath her, and the faint reed music of the curator's body, and the faint, far-off ticking of something that might have been her own heart. I have recorded a religious vocalization, the curator said. It is incomplete. I will require the designation at the next session. You will not get it, she said. Her voice came back to her, raw and small. That is not for you to determine. It is, she said. It is exactly for me to determine. That is the only thing in this room that is for me to determine. You can have my voice, and you can have my body, and you can have the shape of my prayer in my bones, but the designation is mine, and it stays mine, and you will not get it. The curator did not answer. It signaled the drones. They unfastened the restraints. She did not have the strength to stand. They carried her back through the corridor, like a piece of furniture being turned to a room, and she lay in their many small, careful hands and watched the pink light of the ceiling pass overhead and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she had won something. She did not yet know what, but something in the chamber behind her had bent, and something in her had not. And on the balance of that asymmetry, her whole self was now resting. When they brought her back to the cell, Tomas was waiting. He had a cup of the metal salt water and a piece of cloth and a small grim look on his thin iridescent face. He helped her to the floor, and he put the cloth on her forehead, and he did not ask her what had happened. I prayed at it, she croaked. You what? Prayed at it. In Polish. For 3 hours I didn't tell it my name. He stared at her, then he started to laugh. It was a terrible laugh. The laugh of a man who had not laughed in a long time. Dry and cracked, and on the edge of weeping, and it filled the small cell, and it shook his thin shoulders. And at the end of it, he put his forehead against her shoulder, and he said, into her shoulder, Oh, Helena, oh, you marvelous woman, oh, you absolute idiot. You are going to get us both killed, and I have never been so glad to meet anyone. It didn't know what to do, she said. Thomas, it didn't know what to do. He sat up. He looked at her. What do you mean? It tilted its head, the way a dog does. I said no, and it tilted its head, and I said the prayer, and it tilted its head, and it didn't know what to do with me. Tomas, it's been collecting us for how long? Centuries. The catalog is very old, and it doesn't know what to do when we refuse. They don't refuse, he said slowly. Helena, the others, they don't refuse, they cooperate. The curator asks for a designation and the specimen gives a designation. That's the whole arrangement. That's why the catalog works. We give them what they ask for because we think, if we give them what they ask for, they will be kind to us, and they are kind to us in their way, and so we give them more. And that is how the documentation gets finished, and that is how the transfer happens, and that is how nobody comes back. She watched him work it through. They've never had to take it by force, he said. Have they? They've never had to. I don't think they have, she said. I think we've always given it to them. He was quiet for a long time. I gave them my mother's name, he said finally. In my second year, I gave them the name of my ship. I gave them the recipe for empanadas. I sang them a lullaby. I thought if I sang to it, it would understand I was a person. And it took the song and it filed the song, and the song is in their archive now, and I do not know how to get it back. Thomas, I gave them everything, he said. Helena, I gave them everything I had and they put it in a drawer. Thomas, listen. What? I have an idea. The idea was this. The curator wanted designations. The curator wanted origins. The curator wanted above all else, to fix truth. Of a thing, the indexable, archivable, transferable truth. The phenotype and the genotype and the name and the memory and the song. That was what the catalog ate. That was what it filed. That was what made a specimen complete. And a complete specimen could be moved to the central archive. And the central archive was the place that no one came back from. So they would not give it the truth. They would give it everything else. They would give it lies. Beautiful, detailed, internally consistent, contradictory, vast, and proliferating lies. Helena would invent a homeworld with 7 moons and a religion of arithmetic. Tomas would invent a mother named Ines, who had been a queen of the deep mines of a planet that did not exist. And he would invent a different Ines the next day, a baker, a soldier, a saint, and he would weep real tears for each of them, and he would mean it, because the lie was the only true thing left to him. They would give the curator 1,000 origins and 10,000 designations and 1,000,000 names for the woman in the yellow kitchen, and none of them be the real one. The catalog could not file a contradiction. The catalog could not transfer an incomplete specimen. Catalog would choke. It's not a plan, Tomas said. Helena, it's not a plan, it's a way to die slowly. We are already dying slowly, she said. It will hurt, I know. It will hurt for a very long time. I know, and if it works, Helena, if the catalog chokes, what do you think happens then? You think they let us go? You think they say, well, that didn't work, off you pop home. They'll dispose of us. We become defective specimens. The disposal protocols are not gentle, Helena. I have heard them. I have heard what they do to the ones who break. Thomas, she said. What? I would rather be disposed of as a defective specimen than archived as a complete one. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, my mother's name was not Ines. I know, she said. I know it wasn't. I don't remember what it was. I know. It wasn't Ines. No, she said, and mine wasn't the woman in the yellow kitchen either. Or maybe she was. Or maybe she was someone else. We will tell them she was someone else. We will tell them she was everyone else. We will tell them she was the Queen of Mars, and the cook on a freighter, and a nun in Krakow, and a slave in the salt mines of a moon that does not exist. We will give them every mother we can think of, and the real one stays here. She tapped her chest, with us, in the dark, where they can't reach. Tomas put his face in his hands. All right, he said into his hands. All right, all right, all right. It took them 3 weeks to break the catalog. Helena counted the days on Tomas's wall beside his own scratches, and she made her own column, and her column grew faster than his, because she was telling more lies than he had ever told truths. And the lies took less time. She told the curator she had been born on a station, orbiting a black hole. She told it she had been born in the belly of a whale on an ocean world. She told it she had 3 brothers, then 4, then none, then 1, named Piotr, named Andrei, named Mikhail, named no name at all, because in her culture the firstborn was not named until he killed his first wolf. She told it her people indexed memory through food, and then through music, and then through scars, and then through the names of rivers, and then, on the second Tuesday, with a perfectly straight face, through the patterns of cracks in old ceilings. The curator filed every word. The curator filed every word, and the curator's reed music began, very gradually, to sound less like wind through reeds, and more like wind through a broken instrument. She invented a grandmother who had been the last speaker of a language with 17 words for water. She invented a grandfather who had hunted ice whales with a bone spear and a long rope made from his own hair. She invented a sister who had married a glacier, and a brother who had become a lighthouse. She invented an uncle who was also a cousin who was also in certain seasons, a goat. She invented holidays. She invented the harvest festival of the moon of many doors, in which children carried small candles through their houses and named each room after a dead relative. She invented the funeral rite of the half-eaten apple, in which the deceased's favorite fruit was bitten once and buried at the threshold. She invented the marriage custom of the bound thumb, in which lovers tied their right thumbs together for a day and a night, and could not eat or wash or work without each other's help. The curator filed all of it. The curator asked for more. Curator to know the songs sung at the harvest festival. And Helena sang it, making it up as she went. Tuneless thing that borrowed the melody of a Polish lullaby and bent it sideways. The curator asked for the prayer of the half-eaten apple, and Helena invented one in 3 stanzas. The curator asked for the vow of the bound thumb, and Helena invented one, and then the next day invented a different one. And when the curator pointed out the inconsistency, she explained, gravely, that the vow varied by region, and that in fact there were 17 regional variants, and would the curator like to hear them all? The curator would. The curator did. The curator filed every variant, and the curator's reed music grew thinner and thinner, and the small drones that came in with it began to move in a slightly less coordinated way, as if the central thing they were attached to was, somewhere very deep down, beginning to twitch. It noticed. Of course it noticed. It was not stupid. It was the lead curator of a catalog 4,000 species deep, and it had never been stupid. It noticed the contradictions. It questioned her about them. It said, on the 11th day, specimen, previous statement regarding the indexing of memory through olfactory recall is inconsistent with your current statement regarding the indexing of memory through topographical observation of architectural decay. Please clarify. Both are true, Helena said. That is not possible. It is for us. The bone plate tilted. Explain. We are a contradictory species, she said. We index memory through all of these things. Through others. We index memory through the smell of rain on concrete. We index memory through the sound of a particular person clearing their throat. We index memory through the way a certain light falls across a kitchen floor at 4 in the afternoon in October. We have a word for the feeling of remembering something you cannot quite remember. We have a word for the smell of a place you have never been but feel you should have been. We have 100 words for love, and they all mean different things, and none of them mean the right thing. We are not indexable. I have been trying to tell you. We are not indexable. The curator was silent for a long time. You are being uncooperative, it said. I am being human, she said. I am sorry. They are the same thing. In the cell next door, through the seam in the wall, Tomas was telling his own lies. He told the curator his people had a god with the head of an otter. He told the curator his people held funerals for shoes. He told the curator a long and detailed and entirely fabricated story about a war between 2 cities over the proper way to fold a paper bird, and he wept while he told it. And the curator filed the war and filed the bird, and filed the 2 cities, and asked for the names of their kings. And Tomas gave it 47 names of kings, and on the 40th name he started to laugh, and on the 43rd name he started to cry, and on the 47th name the curator made a sound it had never made before. It was a sound like a violin string snapping. It was a sound like a door closing in a house that has been empty for a long time. It was a sound, Tomas said later, that he would carry with him for whatever life he had left, because it was the first sound he had ever heard a curator make that was not entirely under the curator's control. It was the sound of confusion. On the 22nd day, the curator came to Helena's cell alone. It came in through the dilating door, and it stood in the middle of the floor, and it folded its many limbs against its body, and it said, Preamble. You are lying to me. Yes, Helena said. For how long have you been lying to me? Since I woke up. Why? Because you are trying to put me in a drawer, she said. And I will not go in a drawer. The bone plate tilted. The reed music came and went, and came again, and she had the distinct sense that the curator was, for the first time in 4,000 species, thinking. This is novel behavior, it said finally. Is it? In 4,012 documented species, no specimen has refused designation by submission of false data. Resistance, yes. Silence, yes. Self-harm occasionally. Falsification, no. It is not. The curator paused. It is not an efficient strategy. Falsification requires more cognitive expenditure than truth. It is not an evolutionarily stable behavior. It should not exist. And yet, it stood there for a long time. She could see her face in the bone plate. She looked thinner than she remembered. She looked older. She looked, she thought, a little like her mother. "Is your designation specimen?" the curator said quietly. "My designation is Helena Marchak, daughter of a queen of Mars, born on a station orbiting a black hole, third of 7 sisters, raised by wolves, indexed through the cracks in old ceilings, fluent in the language of paper birds. And I will tell you a different answer if you ask me again tomorrow." The curator was silent. "I cannot file you," it said. "No. The catalog requires a stable designation. The transfer protocol requires a complete specimen. You are not a complete specimen. You will never be a complete specimen. I cannot transfer you to the archive. No. Do you understand what this means? I understand that I will not be put in a drawer." "It means," the curator said, and there was something in its reed music she had never heard before. Something almost like a tremor. "That you will be marked as defective. It means that you will be removed from the catalog. It means that you and the other one, the male, the one telling stories of paper birds, will be subject to disposal." "I know. The disposal is not gentle, I know. And you accept this," she thought about it. She thought about it for a long, honest moment, because the question deserved a long, honest moment, and she had not given the curator any honest moments in 3 weeks, and she felt suddenly that she could afford to give it one. "Yes," she said, "I accept this." Why? She thought about her mother. She thought about the yellow curtains. She thought about Tomas in the next cell, telling lies about kings. "Because the woman in the yellow kitchen stays with me," she said. "And she does not go in your drawer. And if the only way to keep her out of your drawer is to go in the disposal with her, then that is what I will do. She comes with me, wherever I go. She does not go in your drawer." The curator stood very still. "That is not a logical statement," it said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." The disposal was scheduled for the next morning. She did not know how she knew it was morning. There was no light in the cells. No day and no night. Something in the warm wall changed its rhythm. And Tomas, in the next cell, scratched the final mark on his calendar and put down his stone and came through the seam in the wall and sat down beside her on the floor. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. They were quiet for a while. "I want to tell you something true," he said. "Before we go. Is that all right?" "Yes." "My mother's name," he said, "was Sophia. She made empanadas on Sundays. The pastry was bad. She knew the pastry was bad. She made them anyway because my father loved them, and she loved my father. She died when I was 19 and I was not there. I have not said her name out loud in 94 years. Sophia. Sophia Reyes, that was my mother. Thomas, don't say anything. I just wanted to say it once out loud, where the catalog could not have it. There, it is said. It is mine. It is not in a drawer." Put her hand on his. "My mother," she said, "was Ewa Marchek. She sang in Polish while she rolled out pierogi on Sundays. Pierogi were perfect. The pastry was perfect. She knew the pastry was perfect, and she pretended she did not know because she did not want to seem. She died when I was 23 and I was there." I held her hand. Her hand smelled like flour and lemon rind until the end. "Ewa Marchak. That was my mother. She is not in a drawer." They sat in the warm dark and they held each other's hands and they said their mother's names, very softly, over and over, and the wall of the cell began to dilate. The curator came through. It was alone. No drones, no assistants. It folded itself through the door and it stood in the middle of the floor and it looked at them, in whatever way it looked at things, and it said, "I have decided not to dispose of you." Helena did not move. Tomas did not move. "What?" Helena said. "I have decided not to dispose of you." Curator said again. "I have reviewed your case for 19 hours. I have consulted the catalog. I have consulted the protocols. I have consulted also certain considerations that are not in the protocols. I have decided that the disposal of an unindexable species would be a greater loss than its preservation. I do not have authority for this decision. I am taking the authority." "I don't understand," Helena whispered. "You are the first," the curator said, "to refuse the drawer. In 4012 species, you are the first. The catalog is older than my species, older than my species' memory of our species. We have been collecting since before we had a word for collecting, and you, It paused. The reed music was very soft. The first hoof has made me wonder whether the catalog is a thing that should exist. There is a ship, the curator said. A maintenance vessel. It will leave the preserve in 9 hours, bound for a trade station in the spiral. It is unattended. I will not see it leave. Will be, at that moment, occupied with a matter of catalog audit that will require my full attention for approximately 11 hours. If you are not on the vessel when it leaves, I will not be able to assist you. If you are on the vessel when it leaves, I will not be able to stop you. Tomas made a sound she did not recognize. Why, Helena said. The bone plate tilted, one last time. You said the woman in the yellow kitchen comes with you, the curator said. Wherever you go. I have been curator of this preserve for 600 of your years. I have catalogued 4,000 species. I have in that time never thought about my own mother. It paused. Her name was Vey. She tended the resin in the eastern grove. I had not until you remembered her. For her to not be in a drawer either. Helena began to cry. Go, the curator said. The vessel is in the western bay. Corridor is unguarded. I am going now to begin my audit. I will not turn around. It turned. It folded itself through the door. It did not turn around. They ran. They ran through corridors that pulsed with pink light, and they ran past cells full of resin and shapes, and they ran past the cathedral chamber where Helena had been decanted, and they did not look at the shapes in the resin because if they looked they would stop on, and if they stopped they would never start again. They ran on Tomas's iridescent legs and on Helena's slowly remembering legs, and at the end of the corridor there was a bay, and in the bay there was a ship, small and gray and ugly and unmanned, and they got into it, and Tomas had been a pilot once, 94 years ago. Sat down at the controls and looked at them for a long moment and said, I think I remember how to do this. Thomas, I think I remember. The ship lifted. The bay opened. The preserve world fell away beneath them, dim and warm and the color of old ivory. And through the viewport Helena saw, just for a moment, a figure standing very still at the edge of the western bay, four-armed, faceless, watching. It did not raise a hand. It did not need to. They went into the dark, and the dark received them, and the catalog behind them did not file the loss. In the years afterwards, when they had reached the trade station and given false names to the customs officer, and traded the gray ship for passage on a freighter and the freighter for passage on another freighter, and the second freighter for a small life on a small moon at the edge of human space, Helena Marchak would sometimes wake at night with the taste of copper in her mouth, and she would lie in the dark and listen to Tomas breathing beside her, and she would whisper her mother's name into the dark, the real one, true one, the one she had never given the catalog, and she would whisper Tomas's mother's name beside it. And she would whisper, sometimes, when she was feeling generous, the name of a curator's mother who had tended resin in an eastern grove, 600 years ago, in a place that no longer had a name, 3 names, held in the dark, out of the drawer. The catalog, far away in the central archive, hummed on without them. It had 4,012 species. It would have 4,013, eventually, and 4,014. It would never have humans. Humans had been tried, and humans had been found by the catalog's own protocols defective. Helena Marchak, lying in the dark on a small moon at the edge of human space, smiled at the ceiling and tasted copper, and was, in the way that mattered, free. She was a person. She had a name. She had a home. She had a mother whose name was Iwa. She was not a specimen. She never would be.